I'm about to say the word that I know got you out of bed this morning. The word that is so inspirational to you that you knew instinctively, really knew, that you were going to be changed by your time here today. Bylaws. Denominational bylaws. No? In the past 3 months, we've been working with 3 different themes that collectively lead us to this point, to this sermon on denominational bylaws. Stick with me here. To our newcomers, a note about our service today. Today's service is about our UU democracy, and sometimes it comes as a surprise just how democratic we are. We are not a creedal religion. We are a democratic and covenantal faith. In January, we explored finding our center, asking what that center was for us as individuals, as a spiritual community, and as a faith tradition. In February, we moved toward love, perhaps sensing somehow that embracing love could get us closer to the understanding of that center. And now, this month, as we explore vulnerability, we find ourselves face to face with the question of how vulnerable we may feel at the prospect of change. Because, quite literally, changes in something that has long sat at the center of our faith tradition, something toward which many of us feel love and by which many of us have felt resonance with, a lens through which our spiritual selves finally feel seen when we encountered Unitarian Universalism. Change is in the air. Change is being proposed, is being offered to us, is asking questions. What is it that makes us feel so vulnerable about change? Is it a fear that we may get it wrong? If so, can we name a time when we absolutely, positively, totally, unequivocally, without misstep, got it right? We may look happily at changes of which we are justifiably proud, but do we really know that these changes have not wrought unintended consequences? We make the change, we feel good about ourselves, we pat ourselves on the back, and then discover later on that that's not what we meant to do. Every action, no matter how well intended, no matter how well researched, contains within it the possibility that what happens next is not what we wanted. In 1961, the Unitarians and the Universalists did this big, brave, necessary, vulnerable thing. They sat down and they set aside their differences, their financial differences, sorta, and their educational differences, sorta, and their theological differences, sorta. And they looked at the demographics of liberal religion and realized we kind of got to get over this fear of change. Do the best we can in this moment right now. Because if we wait until we know we're going to get it right, we'll be waiting, well, forever. We'll be waiting our way into our obsolescence. It's easy when you are faced with making a big, dramatic change to think, we gotta wait until we get this right. We gotta wait until we know that it's not gonna have unintended consequences. But that's not actually gonna get us anywhere. We need to do something, right? If someone completely unfamiliar to Unitarian Universalism asks those of you with long connection to it to tell them about your faith, if they really want to know, what might you share? How would you describe this many-syllabled religious tradition? Someone asks, I understand you don't share a common set of beliefs, so what holds UUs together? More than likely, your response will include something about our 7 principles, We don't gather around a common set of beliefs. We gather around a common set of principles. I preach on them. They are the bedrock of my preaching life in the way that the Torah works for the rabbi, or the Quran works for the imam, or the Bible, or more specifically, what's commonly referred to as the New Testament for Christian priests and ministers. They are not beliefs. They are principles, and they are and they have always been aspirational, and they are set up through our association bylaws in the language of covenant. This is what we member congregations of the UUA covenant to affirm and promote, these principles and these sources. In precise language, the living tradition we share draws from many sources. To live them well is difficult, and that is how it should be. We often miss the mark. And when we miss the mark, we have the opportunity to keep trying, to start over and give ourselves a second chance and a third chance and a fourth chance if we will allow ourselves to be vulnerable to that misstep, mistake, apology, try again. We come together with the invitation and expectation that we will work to uphold and live these principles. And for many of those here today, these principles may have been what brought you to Unitarian Universalism to begin with. And these principles are, in fact, written out explicitly as bylaws in a section called Article 2, entitled Principles and Practices. In the spring of 2020, the UUA Board of Trustees tasked a study commission with the job of reviewing Article 2 of the UUA bylaws and proposing revisions that will enable our UUA, our member congregations, and our covenanted communities to be a relevant and powerful force for spiritual and moral growth, healing, and justice. It's important to note here that not only was this not the first time that a study commission was tasked with this role, but that it is also mandated in those same UUA bylaws that we look at Article 2 every 15 years. They want us to examine our bylaws, our principles, our faith. It was intended, it was baked into our merger. And that is why they decided back in 1961, when they made their multi-syllabic denomination and they wrote its bylaws. Linda shared with you the original Article 2 language in our first reading. Imagine if those were still the principles that we placed at the center of our faith today. Hey, we did it good in 1961. Why change them? Did you hear the gendered language that was so very much the norm in that time frame? Such that by 1984, after years of people begging our association to see the problematic sexism within those words that are intended to be centered to our very existence as a faith tradition, a change finally came. In 1984, 5, and 6, I was a middle schooler. I attended church regularly, but I don't remember any big hullabaloo about this. I don't even think I knew the 1961 principles. But when I did become aware of those ones that were written in the 80s, they were deeply moving for me, and they have been bedrock for me. They live in me. They are with me in the pulpit. A majority of you likely became UU, if you think of yourself that way at all, after 1985. And so for you, the principles are the only center of our faith that you've ever known. We have lived with them for 40 years, and they have lived in us. These words, adopted officially at the GA in 1985, have felt to many of us as bedrock. They have brought some of us into Unitarian Universalism. They have helped us feel seen. When I have conversations with people who are interested in Unitarian Universalism and I share the principles with them, I often hear a very similar refrain from all of these people. I hear them say that these principles resonate with them. People say, yes. People say, those principles are my principles. People say some version of, I didn't know religion could be like this. I didn't know religion could be organized this way. So the commission has completed its work. They published a working draft this past fall, holding many, many listening sessions to receive feedback. And then because the Board of Trustees has the prerogative to amend the proposal, they met in January. and incorporating their own ideas and all that they had heard, they published a more complete draft in January. Just to finish the wonky part, this is the rest of the process. It will need to be voted on by a simple majority at GA in Pittsburgh General Assembly this June, and then again with a 2/3 majority at the next General Assembly, which may be online. There are some things that shock me about my response to the language and the changes. It feels strange to think about learning a new language for a faith that has been mine since I was born. They're no longer principles in the new version. They're referred to as values. They're no longer sources in the new version. They're referred to as inspirations. It may take us time to fully embrace this change, and I do not want to gloss over grief or loss that may be sitting with you now, because change inevitably produces both. So I invite you to deeply breathe, to breathe together, and as we breathe, I want to offer some suggestions and reflections on my own thoughts and feelings about these changes. I will experience grief and loss if these changes are adopted, but that is not a reason not to adopt them. They are the inevitable outcome of making ourselves vulnerable and leaving ourselves and our hearts open to changes that need to happen. So I will experience grief, and what I love about their work is manifold. First, it is work, it is action, it is verbs, it was a playground of aspiration. It is easy to nitpick language. It has no principles, it has no sources, it has these values at the heart of our covenant. And at the heart of the covenant, it says, with love as the central value, or as the proposal reads, the enduring love that holds us together. Love inspires and powers the passion with which we embody our values. And then it lists the values themselves, specifically referring to them as inseparable values. Each informs the rest. I want you to think about that. If you look at the principles in our hymnal, you see a numbered list. Sometimes people think that that numbered list means, oh, this is first and then second, and then we go down to it, and then people move them around. Oh, number 7 actually should be the first one, but it's a numbered list that does not suggest to us that there is anything braiding those values together, those principles together. They exist independent of one another. Can I invite you to place the graphic up? The new graphic that got created as a consequence of their work looks like this on our screen. And you can see that while there is language in each of those swirls sort of invite a coming together and a crossing over. It offers us justice with language about the need to be a multicultural, beloved community where all people thrive. It offers us generosity with this recognition that we cultivate a spirit of gratitude and hope. It offers us evolution and intent to adapt to the changing world. Pluralism, that we celebrate that we are sacred beings, diverse in culture and theology and experience, and we want to learn from one another and openly explore the breadth and depth of our many wisdoms. We embrace our differences and commonalities with love, curiosity, and respect, they say. It offers equity with this language that we declare that every person has the right to flourish with dignity and worthiness. And we covenant to use our time and wisdom and attention and money to build and sustain a fully inclusive and accessible community of communities. And it offers interdependence. We honor the sacred, interdependent web of all existence. With humility, we understand our place in the web. We covenant to care for and respect the earth and all beings by fostering relationships of mutuality. And we work to repair the bonds we have broken. It is a set of values that holds within it action verbs, aspirations, but actions. So that is one thing that I love about this new set of Article 2 principles. The second thing, and the result of this has been taking some, this is taking something that was static, that 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and turning it into this dynamic and active woven together, no lines between our principles, but curls of interrelatedness. One thing I think is key to this new envisioning is the way in which these ideas themselves are interrelated. We've had these distinct principles since the 80s, and they were powerful words that speak as though a complete thought that is not, in the end, connected to that which came next. And in this revision, what we see are these interlocking ways in which the values that guide us as faith, as Unitarian Universalists, are in themselves interdependent. They are each an integral part of the other values to which they are linked. They are inseparable. The third thing that I love about them is the invitation itself. That written into our bylaws is an awareness that there is no way we are finished. There is no way we are ever finished. That of course we make mistakes, and we made mistakes. The last time we had this conversation, unintended of course, but think this through, it was the Reagan years. For those of you alive then, can you think of things you were certain were true in that time that you have now come to think of with a bit of cringe? My bangs alone? This new proposal is in no small part a response to the work that we've been doing to acknowledge systemic racism and white supremacy within our association, as painful as it has been to name. Some years ago, I learned that Henry David Thoreau was the first person to blend graphite with clay to make a smear-free pencil. I thought that was pretty cool, because it lines with the whole idea of having a faith that is changeable. And then I learned that Unitarian Joseph Priestley invented the eraser. Our 7 principles were never intended to last forever. They are not a creed. We are not a creedal faith. The charge to the commission itself stated that there is nothing sacred in the number of principles or the sources or their specific wordings. Liberal religion has always embraced change. It has always reinvented itself. Liberal religion looks at the world around itself and it recognizes that it has a duty to adapt, that it might better respond to the world in which it currently finds itself. Evolution of ideas and practices is the DNA of our faith. And if we cannot change, if we become unwilling or unable to envision new ways of being or describing ourselves, we risk losing ourselves into creedalism, into outdated language, into outdated theological or social or cultural norms. Is it possible then that organizations that we love might also have left holes in their important work? Because honestly, one huge hole left in that work back in the Reagan years is this: where was the love? We know that religion at its best promotes love in the world, that religion at its best acts love into being. That language that they use in these new versions, love is the enduring force that holds us together. Mwah! This commission's proposal has located something long absent at the center of our faith, love, and it has been missing from our principles. It showed up briefly in one small part of our source, and what was once lost has now been found. It's beautiful that we work within a faith tradition that says our collective understandings have a power that we need to listen to and hear and respond to. That we want to hear what you have to say about this, and we want to incorporate it and make sure that we are definitely hearing and responding to and turning what was into what could be, that we are gestating, incubating, becoming something more. We are playing with the language of our faith and the center around which we hum. I can imagine somebody coming into Unitarian Universalism now, never having heard of the former 7 principles, and seeing the new language. And I can imagine those people reading that statement of values for the first time, and those values will resonate with them. They'll say, those are my values too. They'll say, I didn't know religion could be like this. I didn't know religion could be organized this way. If we let ourselves go, and if we let ourselves embrace the power of change in a world of change, our faith calls us to do what we can, to do something still imperfect. So, may we feel the grief of loss within change, no matter how beautiful the offering on the other side. And yet, may we sit with those hard emotions as they slowly transform into a new and powerful faith in change that results in fierce love. And may we know our work to respond to the impact of the unintended consequences set in motion by the actions of our ancestors. May we let go of perfectionism and take pride in what is possible. May it be so. May we make it so. Amen.